Hello! Wait a bit of time for people to come on. So, welcome to this AimHi Live. This one is called Why Do We Sleep? And it's an AimHi trial run, so if you're just tuning in, then here's how this is going to work. I'm just going to kind of explain some cool things. I'm going to relate them to things that you're supposed to know for school as well. But please just throw any questions my way. I want to be bombarded with questions about the things that I'm talking about. Why do we sleep? Ooh, okay, before I started talking about why we sleep, I was going to actually start by asking if anyone's ever seen a chicken being born. Because I saw this yesterday. Someone sent me a video. Because, obviously, like, an egg is, like, egg-shaped. Let me just draw an egg shape just in case. What you might not realise is that inside that egg, when the chicken is just about to hatch, it is inside that egg perfectly egg-shaped. It's got its body, and then it's got its like head like folded inside its body, and then it's got like its legs kind of wrapped around there. And it's honestly like when it comes out, you're like, oh my god, that is shaped completely like an egg. And then obviously it kind of unfolds itself. So I'm now going to talk to you about sleep. The next section is about ants. Ants. Question number 1. How do ants sleep? Throw it into the box. I want to hear what people have to say. Okay, so someone said tiny sleeping bags, which is actually correct. Yeah, there's a booming industry in ant sleeping bags. But that wasn't what I was talking about. I wasn't talking about the way that they get into bed. What I was talking about was how they actually sleep. Because when was the last time you saw an ant? Anyway, I found out recently that ants sleep for a certain period of time, and it's hard to see them sleeping for a certain reason. What do you think that might be, and what do you think the time might be? Oh, Ben's on it. Hey Ben, how you doing? Ben's in New Zealand. Wait, what time is it in New Zealand? 1:35? They sleep underground and you don't see them. That's what I thought they did. I thought they would just like go into the nest and sleep. But actually, it turns out that they just sleep for like a few moments at a time, like a split second, and then they just carry on with their work. Can you imagine that? You're doing your work, you're asleep, and then you're awake again, and then you're just carrying on. And I guess that somehow they've worked out that that's the most efficient way of sleeping. Everything has to sleep somehow. It's something that we're still kind of trying to work out why, but even ants have to sleep. They cope with it by just doing it in tiny little breaks rather than doing it all in one go like we do. Why can't we do micro sleeps? I don't know, it would be really cool if we could do micro sleeps. It would be really cool if we could do micro sleeps because it would probably help us to get a lot more done in life if we could just keep going, maybe? Ants are so much more efficient than us in so many ways. Who here has heard of leafcutter ants? You might have seen them if you've ever been to like a tropical region, and they're kind of like wandering along with their little ant bodies, which do not look anything like this. Loads of them will be carrying these like huge bits of leaf that are far bigger than their bodies, and they carry them in their jaws. They basically strip trees. Like they climb up the trees, they like chew their way through the leaves, and then they carry them back down into the nest. But they can't eat the leaves, but they spend the whole time gathering them. Who knows why that might be? The answer is that ants are some of the only animals in the world, apart from us, that do farming. Ants run their own farms. And these leafcutter ants, inside their nests, they have these huge farms full of fungus. And the fungus they feed the leaves to. I'm going to find a picture actually of leafcutter ants. So I just got a question in from Ben about how their mandibles are not suitable for eating. They can use their mandibles for eating as well, and they're really good for fighting. It's not that their mandibles aren't good enough to allow them to eat the leaves. It's just that they've evolved with a much more efficient diet, where they've realized that if they gather the leaves, then they can feed them to the fungus, and the fungus will process them into like sugars and carbohydrates and vitamins and all the things that the ants need, and they've just realized that that's the most efficient way to do it. I really want to find a picture of a leafcutter ant's nest. Again, I'm going to go back to the beginning and drop it on the top. So this is a leafcutter ant's nest that basically these people filled with concrete and then slowly excavated so that they could see what was inside it. And look at all those chambers and like the incredible network. Like these ants build these enormous cities where they can bring all the leaves down, and then the fungal gardens inside will digest the leaves for them. There's one more cool thing I wanted to tell you about that, which isn't related to sleep, and then I'll go back to sleep. Their nests do something really cool. So you've seen that their nests are absolutely huge. And because they're absolutely huge, they kind of have a problem. And the problem is how do we get oxygen into the bottom so that ants at the bottom can breathe? What happens is this. If this is the top of the nest, and then let's say this is the nest kind of going downwards, then what people noticed when they were investigating these nests is that the hills on the top had little holes in them, obviously for the ants going in and out, but they also had holes in them that were either sucking in cold air, or that were blowing out hot air. Can anyone think why that might be happening? What the point of this is? Give some time for people to throw some comments in. So, actually, that's brilliant. There's a bit of climate control inside, and there's also a bit of air vents. So the whole point is to suck in cold oxygen. And so the cold oxygen is sucked to the bottom, which also keeps the bottom nice and cool. And then out the top is blown warm carbon dioxide. So basically the whole nest is acting like a lung. The whole nest is breathing so that all the tiny little ants at the bottom can still get all of the oxygen that they need. Now, here's the other cool thing that's absolutely genius that the ants have designed, is off the side of these tubes, they have these little chambers. And in the chambers, they dump all of their rubbish. They dump all of their waste. Why would they do this? Philly Fish just said driving convection currents. Yes, this is absolutely it. Basically, they dump all their rubbish, and as the rubbish rots, it heats up, and because it's heating up, it drives the hot air, and that's what's creating the whole circular flow system that sucks in cold oxygen and pushes out carbon dioxide. I think that's so cool. So we've talked about why ants sleep. If people are just tuning in now, ants sleep a few seconds at a time, a few milliseconds at a time, so they can just get on with their work. Let's go back to the picture of the leafcutter ant's nest before we move on as well. Here's a leafcutter ant's nest for those who are just joining as well. They're absolutely massive because they just run this amazing industry of like sucking in leaves from the surrounding area and then using them to feed them to their fungus garden, because ants are farmers, and the fungus garden eats the leaves, and in exchange it provides all the food and nutrients that the ants need. And it's such an efficient way for ants to grow that they can create these huge mega cities. And so what you get is some of these chambers, like the one here, will be used to dump all of the rubbish, which will then mean hot air will flow up this tube and outwards. And other tubes will often be more vertically downwards, so they can suck in cold oxygen. Why do people think it's not a good idea to have a tube that goes straight from the top of the nest straight down to the bottom of the nest? And it's a similar answer to why is it not a good idea to have the tube open just flat on the ground? Why is it better to have it inside a hill and open at the top of the hill? It's because if you think about what happens when it rains. Philly just said that. Brilliant. It's so that you don't get rain pouring into the bottom of the nest and then flooding the whole thing from the bottom. So the two defences they have are, one, having multiple kinks in the tubes, and the other defence is having them in hills, because then the water will collect at the bottom of the hill rather than flowing into the top. Okay, so voting time. What do people want to hear about next? There are two options on the journey of sleep. One of them is dolphins. Dolphins. I'm not going to write the whole word dolphins. I'm just going to write dolp. The other option is olms. OLMS. So, get your votes in. Do people want to hear about dolps next or olms? Majority are going for olms. Right, let's go for olms. Let's get the olms done. And then what we'll do is we'll come back to dolphins, because we can do them both. Right, here's an olm. When people ask me what my favourite animal is, olm is my go-to. They're like a little salamander snake thing that lives in the caves of southeastern Europe. Well, they're salamanders, but they look like these kind of lizard things that have no eyes, and they just kind of like slither around the cave. And the main thing that I know about them is that they are one of the main places where the legends of dragons came from, because people found them and they were totally convinced that they were baby dragons. And they have these little like fiery tufts as well. With fiery tufts like that, they're obviously going to produce fire, is the theory. Anyway, right, let's go back to dolphins. Unless anyone has any more questions about olms. What about olms sleeping? I also am not sure if we know, because sleep's quite mysterious. Anyway, we'll get on to like why we sleep properly soon. But first, dolphins. How do dolphins sleep? This is a lot more well known, I think. Half the brain at once is the idea. Because if you think about it, you're in the ocean, you're a bit exposed. You can't just like tuck yourself into bed and have a sleep. You really need to keep yourself protected. Dolphins sleep half of their brain at a time so they can keep on the lookout, which is pretty amazing. I heard this amazing story once about, it was a dolphin that was sadly in captivity and it was like being trained and stuff. But the trainer had taught it to collect rubbish from the pool. So the dolphin would go and like pick up bottles and like bits of litter and stuff and bring them back, and in exchange it'd get fish. Anyway, there was one time that the dolphin brought back a little bit of paper, and then it brought back another little bit of paper, and it got a fish. And then it brought back another little bit of paper, and it got a fish. What do people think happened? Why do people think this was happening? And while I wait, let's do this dance. Yeah, exactly. Dolphin had been ripping up the paper, tearing it into little pieces so they could get more fish. How smart is that? I saw this amazing video recently as well of a dolphin that had figured out how to play a game where it like blew some bubbles out of its blowhole thing. It just blew some bubbles out, and then it kind of like flicked them with the back of its tail to create a vortex. You know, you see those rings of air kind of moving through the water. You're more likely to see them as like smoke rings. So when people fill their mouths with smoke and then they kind of blow in such a way that it creates a ring that just carries on because it's a donut that's constantly spinning. Anyway, it would create these rings for itself and then swim through them. That was so cool. Oh, Ben's asked a great question. If a dolphin can learn something with one side of the brain while the other side is sleeping, and then maintain that information in the other side? That's a really interesting question, and it goes really deep into like our ability to communicate between the two sides of the brain. So dolphins, I believe, have similar to us, where they have a lot of cross connection between the two halves of the brain, so they'd be able to transmit information from one side to the other. There are some people who, for various medical reasons like surgery or something like that, as humans have had the two halves of their brains disconnected. So for example, they might see something and know what the word is, but then they can't vocalize the word, they can't say the word. And I don't know if that's one of the exact examples, but these are the kind of disconnects that form because different tasks are happening on different sides of your brain. So you might like smell something and one side of your brain knows what it is, and maybe you can picture it and you have this feeling of I know what that is, but then you can't say what it is and you can't talk about it. But yeah, it's really interesting, this idea of like how the brain is split in half. But I also know that there has been an amazing study done on human beings who because they've had various brain problems, have had enormous amounts of their brain removed, like sometimes as much as half, and still been able to function as totally normal humans. One of them was even like a really good chess champion apparently. Anyway, I'm going to move on because I've spent ages not talking about sleep. Now I'm going to talk about some sleep stuff. Let's just focus on the Olm picture while we do this. The key thing about sleep to understand is this. You can be asleep for years and you can be alive. You can be in a coma. And as long as you're being fed on a drip, as long as your body is being serviced, you've still got enough oxygen, you can just stay asleep and you'll stay alive. But if you try to stay awake for several days, you will start to go completely mad. I think the record for staying awake is something like 10 or 11 days. And it's extremely bad for you. And this is the really cool thing that we've just started to realize, is that actually being awake is not the norm of being alive. Being asleep is the norm of being alive. And then being awake is like this bonus level that we get. We just get to be awake for a brief moment because we've been asleep. And if you don't sleep, then you can't continue to be alive. And so if we go right back into the past to really early on in evolution, we think that there must have been a point, because back in the past everything was asleep, we think there must have been a point that some living thing briefly woke up. What that means we're still trying to figure out. We think it's like this idea of some nerve-like cells taking control of some other cells in order to coordinate things. And there will have been a brief moment where something woke up, did a bit of coordination, and that helped that living thing to survive far better than other living things around it. And gradually, over the last millions and billions of years, things have been able to stay awake for longer and longer in order to do more and more coordination. But this is why it's so important to sleep, because that's the natural state of being. It's really well understood now that if you're really sleep deprived, if you don't get enough sleep one night, then you probably actually won't store loads of the memories that you had during that day. If you're trying to learn for exams, for example, I know that all exams have been cancelled, but if you're trying to learn for exams, then you need to sleep. You need to sleep as well as you can. It's actually really difficult for teenagers to sleep, especially because of the way that your body clock changes for when you're going through puberty, which is really annoying. But I've made a video about that called Why Can't Teenagers Sleep? I've been talking for ages. Has anyone got any questions? Should schools be open later to let teenagers sleep more? That is a really good question. Actually, this is kind of answered in the video that I've done on YouTube. The problem is that if that happened, you'll create this self-perpetuating problem where actually teenagers will just want to get up later and later and later, because the whole problem is that the teenage body clock is kind of just too long. So every day feels like it's an hour too short. So teenagers always want to go to bed later than actually it makes sense to, and then always want to wake up later than it makes sense to, and that would just continue to happen every single day. So if school started later, yeah, I think you'd just be in the same problem, but it would just keep going. It would maybe work if schools literally started 1 hour later every single day. Some teachers would be a bit upset about that. To finish, I just wanted to talk about ice ages, because since I've been doing all this climate stuff, I've been looking into this a lot more. But I remember when I found out about this, I thought this was so cool. So this is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere for the last 800,000 years, where over here is coming towards today. And as you can see, the CO2 concentration kind of spikes upwards, and then it kind of wanders down a bit, and then it spikes upwards, and then it kind of wanders down, spikes up, wanders down, spikes, wanders. And obviously I'm smoothing this a little bit from what it is, but it's kind of like that. And nobody knows why this happens. Nobody knows why the CO2 concentration spikes up suddenly and then wanders down. These are all things that we're still trying to figure out. But ice ages happen when the CO2 concentration is below about here. So we can put a line on this roughly and be like, okay, here's our line. Everything below this line is Ice Age. Now, I was totally amazed by this when I found out, because I thought that Ice Age was just this thing that happened every now and then. I didn't realise that Ice Age was actually the norm. And for me, it was a similar realisation to sleep, to find out that these brief moments, these little brief moments here of relative warmth on the Earth, we're in one at the moment, they're called interglacials. These little moments of relative warmth are not the norm. The norm is Ice Age. We usually say that the first Homo sapiens, the first humans, arrived around here. And so most of the time that humans have been around has been Ice Age, which I just think is so crazy. We've been quite a long way into this interglacial now. And for those of you who've seen this graph, you'll know that actually it looks like this now, because obviously the Industrial Revolution happened between here and here. And now we're just absolutely spiking CO2. So nobody knows what's going to happen. Nobody knows if some mechanism will kick in that will plunge us into an ice age, or if we'll just carry on in this direction. This going up direction seems to be the more likely, and nobody really knows what's going to happen because everything's changing so quickly. That's obviously the big problem about climate change, is that it's not necessarily that things are changing, because if you follow this graph back enough million years, you'll see that it does go back up again, but it does so very slowly, compared to this extremely rapid rise that we got at the moment, which is obviously the big climate change problem. Anyway, that's kind of the end of the lesson. If anyone's got any more questions or thoughts, let me know, and we'll do a quick thing at the end before we sign off. And also, thanks so much for everyone who's come on this trial, because obviously we are haven't been promoting it that much yet, but we're just trying things out, and it'd be really cool to know if you think this was fun, if it's the kind of thing you'd want to do again, if there are certain elements that you liked more than other elements. It will be really helpful, because basically we're just trying to do this as a really positive, good thing to set up a free online school for people while everyone's stuck at home. So yeah, any feedback would be great. Thanks so much, guys. I'll see what people think. Thanks for Silly Fish for saying it's better than normal class. The aim is we're trying to make something that's that people will actually like doing, because a lot of science at school is quite boring, isn't it? So this is the hope, and then feeding in things that you actually need to know. Thanks very much, everyone. Cool. Thanks, everyone. We shall see you again, I hope. We'll be doing more of these next week. All right. Ciao. Bye.